بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين الحبيب المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته الكرام المنتجبين. All the praise is due. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful. May all the praise and the blessings be to God, the Lord of the universe, the master of the day of judgment, the cherisher and the sustainer of the worlds, and may all the peace and the blessings be upon all the prophets, especially Prophet Muhammad, and upon his purified progeny and the believers of his companions. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and the blessings of Allah be upon all of you, and thank you for joining. We will resume our Qur'an session today with verse number 11 from chapter 22, al-Hajj. I'll read the Arabic, Muhammad Rida will translate, and then we'll study it, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن الناس من يعبد الله على حرف فإن أصابه خير اطمأن به وإن أصابته فتنة انقلب على وجهه خسر الدنيا والآخرة ذلك هو الخسران المبين.
In the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful, and among people there is such who worship God on the edge. Thus, if good befalls him, he is content. But if a trial befalls him, he turns away utterly. He loses both this world and the hereafter. That is the obvious loss.
So previous verse of this chapter talked about those who raised doubts about God and denied God. This verse and few verses to come, they are actually talking about believers, different level of believers, or I mean believers with different level of faith. So actually it is starting with a group of people who believe in God, but they are at the weakest level of faith. The Quran uses a very interesting expression. Those who worship God at the borderline. Very interesting. This is a metaphor. As if the Quran is giving an example, saying, imagine the area of faith has different areas. The center, the Quran of course does not say that, but this is basically what you draw from understanding this example and metaphor. The center of that area is the highest level of faith, highest level of iman or taqwa, piety. Those who have a very strong faith, they are at the center. And the further you go from the center toward the border, the weaker becomes the faith or the piety until you reach the borderline. The borderline, people on the borderline separate them from non-believing is just a line, a thin line. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is talking about those who are on the borderline. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ عَلَى حَرْفٍ. Harf has two meanings, the word harf. Those who worship God on harf. Harf has two meanings here. One is the borderline, just like what we said. And the other is basically by word. They worship God by talking or by word. Harf comes from letters, alphabets. So those people are basically on the borderline. Their faith is not deep, is not rooted in their hearts and in their minds. any wind comes, it might weed them out, weed the faith out, and they unfortunately lose their faith or they abandon their faith. Possibly I have seen people who, when they were living among Muslim communities, they practice the faith, practice whatever other people would practice in that community. For example, they would pray or even they would fast. As ladies, they might wear a cover, hijab, because that is the practice in the community. This is called the herd or the herd tradition. This is practicing the faith out of convenience because everybody is practicing that. So they would like to be same as others. They practice faith out of convenience, not out of religious conviction. But when they migrate to other communities, other nations, where practicing the faith, including the faith of Islam, is not common, soon they get to lose their faith. They abandon their faith. Possibly you've seen this example. I have seen this example. Those are people who used to worship God on the borderline, not because they are convicted, but because of other purposes that the Qur'an refers to. يَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ عَلَى حَرْفٍ. They worship God on the borderline. فَإِنْ أَصَابَهُ خَيْرٌ اطمأن بِهِ. As far as he is doing okay, as far as he or she are doing fine, no hardship, no trouble, no problem in life, no challenges in life, he or she is fine. But the moment he encounters a trial, a problem, a hardship, فإن أصابته فتنة, if he encounters a trial, he would turn away. He would turn away. انقلب على وجهه. He would turn away from the faith. خسر الدنيا والآخرة. He would lose both worlds, this life and the hereafter. So they lose the faith because adopting the faith was for them had a benefit, certain benefit. Their life was fine. The moment they encounter any form of hardship or a challenge, could be financial, could be health-wise, could be family issue, could be a social issue, something that impacting the whole community or the society, then they abandon their faith. Possibly you have seen people who claim to be your friends. This is a good example that I would like to share with you. They are friends as far as there is advantage in the relationship with you. They get benefits. They are enjoying the benefits of this relationship. But the moment their benefits end, not only they cut their relationship, they abandon you. In some cases, they even turn against you. They turn to be your enemies. And this is exactly what some people who have a shallow faith in their hearts. Shallow faith has absolutely no benefits. Absolutely, because the Quran says, in fact, they lose this life, they lose in this world, and they lose in the hereafter. A weak faith does not serve the purpose. I have seen myself, in my life and during my ministry, people who really turn against the faith because they lost the reason. You know, they got married, they decided to practice the faith. Once they get divorced, they leave the faith, or for any other reason, for a job, for an opportunity. It doesn't have to be within the Muslim community. People go to places of worship for certain motivations. You know, I get a green card, I get a job, I get this and that. And then when they lose the advantage or the benefit, they abandon that. Well, there is no benefit in that, obviously. In fact, the Quran says they are the biggest losers. Those who abandon their faith at times of lost opportunity or no more benefits, they are the bigger losers. In fact, the benefit of faith is that the faith comes handy at times of challenges. There you see the benefit of faith. It gives you strength. A lot of people survive a problem and a hardship because of their faith, because it gives them strength, it gives them power, it gives them hope, it gives them motivations to continue, not to give up. This is one of the purposes of the faith when God introduced faith, to seek strength at times. So God says, for those who have this kind of shallow faith, they lose this life and the hereafter. The hereafter is so obvious because they abandon their faith. They will not be saved. How about this life? What does God mean by khasara dunya wal akhirah, losing this world and the hereafter? Well, this means that whatever they have done in the past, they wasted their time. And they just wasted their time, and there is no benefit for them. Whatever they have done, whether they prayed or fasted, a beneficial, a useful faith is a strong faith that can defend you, protect you. Another example, you know, our weak immune system might not help us at challenging times. We get exposed to viruses and illnesses and infections. We need a strong immune system. This is why we really care to strengthen our immune system with nutrition, with diet, with everything, with exercising, so we can face, survive the challenges, the health challenges. Same with faith, brothers and sisters. A weak faith is not that useful. In fact, it could turn to be a very damaging thing. God encouraged us to have a very strong faith. Any question or comment so far before we move to verse number 12?
And again, you guys can raise your question by raising your hand or unmuting yourself or typing it into the chat.
All right. Verse number 12. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يدعو من دون الله ما لا يضره وما لا ينفعه ذلك هو الضلال البعيد.
He calls instead of God what can neither harm him nor benefit him. This is straying far indeed.
So this kind of people who have a shallow faith, when a problem happens, they abandon their faith, they abandon God, and they turn, maybe they go back to idol worshiping. And asking and seeking help from idols. Idols, in the expression of the Quran, are objects that cannot harm and cannot benefit at the same time. We'll talk about this later. And this person goes back, obviously this is a reference to at the early stage of Islam, when there was such cases, those who go back to idol worshipping and ask help or worship a thing that is not able to produce harm or benefit at the same time. And the Quran says, indeed, this is going astray for further places. This is the worst form of, this is a bad form of going astray indeed. Yes. All right. Verse number 13. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يدعو لمن ضره أقرب من نفعه لبئس المولى ولبئس العشير.
He calls on whose harm is nearer than his benefit. Evil indeed is such a patron and evil associate.
Some, when they abandon the faith, they don't go to worship idols. They, in fact, go and worship fake human gods. This is the difference between this verse and the verse before. The one before used the pronoun that refers to objects. This is using a pronoun that refers to humans. Some, in fact, go back when they abandon their faith, they start worshiping. They might start worshiping humans. And this is, the Quran says, even worse than the previous case. Worshipping humans is worse than worshipping idols. This is what the Quran says. لَبِئْسَ الْمَوْلَى وَلَبِئْسَ الْعَشِيرُ. This is an evil case of a master or someone that they worship, and an evil example of a companion or associate. Why? The Quran says they go and worship those whom their harm is more likely than their benefits. So here, this is the difference. In the case of idols, the Quran said they cannot do harm, neither benefits. Here, it says their harm is more than their benefits. It seems that they do have little benefit, but more than benefit, they have harm. Those fake human gods, such as Pharaoh. Pharaoh used to call himself, I am the master God. أَنَا رَبُّكُمُ الْأَعْلَى. I am the supreme God. He imposed himself as a god on Egyptians. And throughout history, this could happen. It could happen today. Possibly there is a nation here that the head of that nation says, I am your God. Anyway, Quran says those are even worse. Why they are worse? Let me elaborate on this. You know, idols do not communicate. They cannot talk. They do not promote themselves, idols. People adopt them as gods. While some fake human gods, they promote themselves. They impose themselves. They introduce themselves as gods. They might have little benefits, such as giving money, giving jobs, giving opportunities to people, but their harm is much more worse. much more bigger than their benefits, because they promise a lot of things. They create false hope in people. I'll deliver you. I'll give you healing. I'll give you this. I'll give you hope. I'll give you that. And people, they might trust, and then they will be failed in this life, and of course in the hereafter. So a human God is much worse than an idol, because they might give little benefit, but their harm is much more. All right. Moving to verse number 14. And this would be the final verse today. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إن الله يدخل الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار إن الله يفعل ما يريد.
He calls on whose harm, Surely God grants those who believe and do good to gardens beneath which rivers flow. For God carries out all that he wants.
So now this verse is talking about other group of believers. Those are the true believers with a strong faith. God is promising, rewarding them. What is the reward for people of a true faith? Is that they get granted granted admission to heaven and the pleasure of God. So this is the promise of God. This is the reward for the true believers, to be granted into heaven. Now, heaven in the Qur'an has been expressed in variety of words. It could be Jannat, gardens. It could be Jannah, paradise. One garden, that's the paradise. So the whole Jannah has different gardens or different levels. The paradise has different gardens and different levels. In English, they refer to it as heaven versus hell, the hellfire. God promises the group of true believers heaven. But there is, of course, there is always, when the Quran refers to believers, the Quran associate mentioning believing with doing good. عملوا الصالحات الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات. Those who believe and they do good. Apparently, based on the Quran, doing either one, only one, it might not be enough to get admitted to heaven. People need to do both. Believe and do good. Doing one, only believing or only doing good, based on the way the Quran is telling us, is not enough. A man or a woman, they might get a reward, a benefit for believing or doing good. But they need to do them both to gain access to paradise. And I think this is the common sense. Somebody who says, I believe in God, automatically this believing should be manifested in his or her behavior. So believing, if somebody says, I believe in God, but he's dishonest, manners, does not ours. In God is in God, it be manifested in our actions. So there is always, and this term is repeated in the Quran, I don't know, hundreds of times. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Those who believe and do good at the same time, those are the people who are saved. In our faith, in the tradition of Islam, it's not enough for somebody to say, you know what, God is in my heart. I believe in God and this is enough. No, it has to be reflected on our behavior, the way we carry on our religious duties, and also the way we treat others, how we deal with others. Do we deal with others in a fair way, in a respected way? We don't intrude on their dignity, on their human rights and others, and even on animals, not only on others, on the environment as well. So this is a very basic concept. When I usually I am asked, what is the concept of salvation and being saved in the Quran? It is these two practices, believing and doing good at the same time. Now the Quran promises the believer salvation, which is, at the hereafter, winning the judgment of God and getting admission to heaven. In the Quran, this term is repeated so many times when it refers to heaven. Jannatin tajri min tahtiha al-anhar. Gardens under which rivers flow. This is repeated many times. So somebody might ask, what is this concept? Gardens with rivers, gardens with rivers. Why only gardens with rivers? The answer, brothers and sisters, God has given great details about heaven and how it looks like to live in heaven, in a great details, in many aspects, not only this term. So the Quran has described life in heaven, for example, that it has no pain, no worries, no grief, no hardship. This is life in heaven. No problems, no turbulences. It also gives details about the believers' homes, which are actually mansions, huge mansions, beautiful, huge mansions with details about the rooms, even the furnitures, the seats that they sit on, the sheet cover that they cover their beds and their seats, even the setup of the seats and how socially encounter one another, their meeting places, their food, their clothing, their drinks, variety of food and clothing and drinks. All of this is mentioned in the Quran. Variety of the pleasures that are available for people of heaven. Their gardens, the trees, variety of fruits, the rivers. What kind of rivers? If I talk about, we need maybe a few sessions just to describe heaven, Jannah, as it is mentioned in the Quran. Again, on top of that, angels would come and entertain people of heaven. They greet them. They keep their company. They entertain them. Again, another thing about heaven, there is always peace, peace of mind, no stress. You don't worry in heaven. Hopefully, all of us, we get to be admitted to heaven, inshallah. There are no worries. There is absolute peace of mind and peace. Nobody bothers you. Nothing bothers you. No words, no talking that bothers you. One of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the names of God is the peace, as-salam, as-salam. That's what the Quran calls God, and calls on heaven to be Darus Salam, the home of peace, the abode of peace. And I think this is even more rewarding than any other form of a pleasure, that you are not bothered with any worries and stress. Today, what really bothers a human, beyond poverty and beyond financial problems and health and sicknesses, is stress and worry. We are worried all the time. This is the nature of living on earth. We are always worried. Even when you are sitting at the best restaurant and enjoying the best food, exactly at that time, you're still worried. Worried that your cholesterol, what is going to happen to your cholesterol, what is going to happen to your weight, whether you're gonna gain weight or not. So at the peak of a pleasure, we are still worried. Worrisome is always associated with our life. In the paradise, there is no worry, no more concerns. That's the beauty. And on top of all of that, brothers and sisters, is the pleasure of God, that God who loves you is pleased with you, and you love God. He is, and you love Him, with you. Now, again, you might ask then why this term is being repeated. تجري من تحتها الأنهار. Rivers flow. Very interesting. You see, Islam was born in the city of Mecca. City of Mecca is basically located as a rocky land, all surrounded by rocky mountains and hills. No vegetation and very dry, very dry. So for people of Mecca, that was on their wish list, to have a garden with rivers. That was their dream to see, something they admire. And this is why the Quran, because it first came to those people, repeated that word. And imagine, let me give you an example. There is a resort, the most beautiful resort on earth, that has a beautiful beaches with a clean water. Haven't you seen these beautiful beaches? Very clear, beautiful water. If you drop a quarter, you can see when it reaches the bottom. And also, and then there are beautiful mountains with the forests and the beautiful trees, and also waterfalls. So this resort wants to promote the tourism to this resort among variety of nations. So when they go to a city, a country that have a cold weather, they lack warm beaches. What they put images of their beautiful beaches, so for people to go and visit. They get inspired, they get amazed by these images, they go and see them. When they go to people who live in the desert, have not seen forest or mountain or waterfall, they put images of that mountain or waterfall. That's the difference. For every community, for every nation, there is a certain message that you need to promote. And heaven, Allah Jannah, Allah heaven, is worth of promoting, so people know what they are going to be rewarded with. What should they anticipate after this life? This life is short. We will leave this life, we will depart, and in a few years or in many years, eventually we will depart. What is waiting for us in the hereafter? God is telling us what is waiting for us. It's worth that we know, and that's the message that God is giving different communities. So Islam started in the desert in Mecca, in a city of a lot of rocks and a dry land. And the Quran talked about beautiful gardens with rivers. If it would have been in other cities, it could be Islam, Quran could have mentioned something else. But later, if you study what is paradise in the Quran, Quran has mentioned variety of aspects that makes paradise something that all would like to pray and wish for, inshallah. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us, grant us this admission to heaven, inshallah. Enable us to seek His pleasure and earn His pleasure and satisfaction. Keep us away from Satan and hellfire, and admit us to paradise, inshallah. I come to end of my session today. If there is any question or comment, I'd like to hear it.
So we have 3 questions so far, and all 3 of them are very loaded questions. I don't know how much time you want to take to answer the question. First, I'll ask a question. You mentioned earlier about the people who claim to be gods, like Pharaoh.
Yes.
Which is a very avowed, claim of being God. But what about all the other things that somebody doesn't say I'm God, but they decide that they have better understanding than God? They decide to make claims and think that their claims are better than God. Does that fall into the same category?
Can you read all the 3 questions, though we decide whether to answer all of them shortly or in details, or maybe we can refer to one or two in next session?
The second question, it says, having power over all things and deciding who He will guide and not guide. So he starts with this beginning, and he says, how much independent will does Allah give us to follow the right path? And the final question, there's like a conversation between the group, was asked, will we ever get to meet God in heaven? And somebody responded, when they get to heaven, that they'll let them know.
All right. So let me answer a question 1 and question 3, because question 2, it needs a little bit of details. Hopefully I can do this within the next 10 minutes. Those who claim to be more knowledgeable, or I don't know, knowing more than God, or able to do more than God, well, this actually, we've talked, the Quran referred to this group as those who raise dispute about God. Yujadilu fillah. They might deny God, or they might say, God has this aspect or that aspect. God is not, for example, God is violent, God is not just, God is careless. We've talked about this before. One aspect for those who denied God, that was yesterday, is that science, does not approve God, and we've talked about this. Some would say, I do not believe in God because God is not stopping evil from happening. And fact, a philosopher wrote maybe 100 years ago that for those who believe in God, I'd like to take them to hospitals so they get to see the suffering of people and ask, where is God? Where is God from the suffering of those people? So the Quran, my point is the Quran is in fact talking about either those who deny God totally, or they associate God with certain things that God is innocent from that, like having children, for example. The angels are the daughters of God. The Quran referring to this, he says, they do this without knowledge. And I discussed this in details last evening, and I would like to refer them to last evening discussion. Without guidance, if they follow the guidance, the evidence in this world, they will reach God and they will know God. And without scripture, no scripture, assign things or deny God. So obviously, the Quran refers to them. And, the Quran yesterday, when we read the Quran, let me tell you exactly which verse number 9 yesterday. The Quran said, for this kind of people, نُذِيقُهُ, we will give him or her a test. We will make him or her to test the punishment in the hereafter. Why? Because this is what they denied. Now they get to know that this is not false. So hopefully I answered this question number 1. If not, please email me in details so I try to answer it next time, inshallah, or in further sessions. Now about, what was the third question? Sorry, I forgot. Can you remember that?
The third question is, when you go to heaven, do you get to see God?
So there is a divided opinion among Muslims that some say on the hereafter, we will be able to see God within Muslims. Many say that even in the hereafter, no, it's impossible because God is not a matter. God is beyond being a matter and beyond the capability of our eyes or senses to understand. We are creatures, we're still creatures, even in heaven. In heaven, the moment we die, even before heaven, the moment we die, the Quran says you will get to see things better. You get to understand things better. See with your hearts. See better. So that's what the Quran says. فَبَصَرُكَ الْيَوْمَ حَدِيدٌ. Your sight will be very powerful. So we'll understand better than now about God. But to physically see him, we believe, and especially the followers of Ahlul Bayt believe that no, God will not be seen. We will get close to understand him and feel his mercy, his love, his forgiveness, his generosity in heaven. But we cannot see him physically because it is not possible to see him. He is not something to be seen. Yes. And let me try answering the second question. That God says in the Quran, in many places, that he guides to the right path who he wants. Does this mean that basically those who believe in this life, this is whom God wanted them to be saved to be believers, and those who basically not believing, this is what God wanted. No, this does not mean that God wants us not to believe and eventually not to be saved. Absolutely not. God has given us the freedom in this life. God has given us the freedom. With the freedom comes responsibility. To choose the path we want. If we chose a path that God wanted, then we believe, which is what we just mentioned before, believing and doing good. This is an option for us. Then we will be saved based on revelation, the revelation of the Qur'an and possibly other revelations. And those who decide not to follow this, they have a freedom. Nobody forced them. And our faith, you cannot force, and God does not force anyone. And God has mentioned also many times in the Quran, if we wanted to force you to join a faith, if we wanted to save the whole life, we would force them to do that. We could have done that, but we left it open for people. We gave them the freedom. We also gave them the responsibility. It does not make sense that you force somebody to do something and then you punish that person for exactly doing what you commanded. And same applies to God. So this guidance is available for everybody. God does not force anyone to be a believer or force anyone to be a disbeliever or denying the belief. It's open for everybody. But it means, this is what it means. For somebody who does not want to be a believer, though there is an opportunity for him or her, does not want to be the law, the rule that God has implied, that this person has sentenced himself or herself to whatever destiny he has chosen. God will not make for him to be saved. This is a path available for him. He will be judged on the day of judgment. Again, if I did not answer this question the way the person who raised this question, please send me details not to answer it, inshallah, in further sessions. All right, if there is no question or comment, we conclude today. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make dua to protect all of you brothers and sisters, to make you enjoy this beautiful mercy and forgive generosity. And as much as you can from the generosity and the kindness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during this month, and to stay safe, to keep you. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for those who are ill and sick, and for those who are in hospital for variety of reasons, that Allah give them a speed recovery. And those who passed away, we ask mercy for them and strength and power and support for those who left behind. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Peace be with you. Thank you, brothers.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, be well. Let me stop recording. Hold on.
What time did you start, Hajj Reza?
We start every day, like at the minute of 6 o'clock.
Oh, 6. So you're on. Okay.